Oh. Chapter 28, Top End Camp. I decided to join Henry for a few days. Otto and Andrew, a grey-haired friend of Otto's with a kind face, joined as well. Early one morning we left in Henry's jeep for Sandy Hills. We drove past numerous tiny villages and entered the former gold mining land. It greeted us with unexpected beauty. Henry's top-end camp, as he called it, was situated on a high plateau on a mountain. The view from here was breathtaking and endless. We could see the valleys and mountains below us, and all the way in the distance was Queensland. The most beautiful thing about this view over a picturesque landscape with its sea of fog and trees was that this idyll wasn't disturbed by anything man-made. One could not see a single sign of human activity. We were well and truly in the middle of nowhere. Me, 3 men, and a dingo. In walking distance was the small McLeod's Creek with delicious fresh water where we drank, washed, and panned for gold. There was no electricity here, nor any other modern convenience. The camp had a cabin with 3 walls, the front was open, looking over the plateau, a table, a fire pit, and a few oil lamps. There's not much else one needs in life. At the first night by the creek we all smoked in, like I had done before at the philosophy farm. Otto began to talk about the spirits of his people that still dwell in this place, about his history and that of his tribe and the tribes who lived where we camped. To think an Aboriginal ancestor sat on this same stone where I was sitting, listening to stories of old, drinking from the same creek. We listened till well into the night. Our stomachs started to rumble, so we lit a cooking fire by the cabin. Henry turned out to be a good cook and took it upon himself to feed us all. Afterward, we just curled up in our swags and fell asleep next to the fire, under a million bright stars. Life was perfect just then. I woke up the next morning to the ashes of a cold fire and the snores of 3 men and a dingo. The fog reached all the way up to the plateau. It looked like you could just continue walking when in reality there was a gigantic drop that would lead to your death if you didn't resist the lure of the cotton soft fog carpet. I went to the creek while everyone else was sleeping and the world was void of human noise. The water seemed ice cold. There is nothing more revitalizing than washing in a cold creek on a foggy morning, surrounded by the chirps of birds and rustling of trees and nothing else. I could have stayed there all on my own. Being a hermit seemed irresistible just then. In fact, there are certain times in my life when I still think it would be the ultimate way of living. I miss the silence and the stillness of heart. Back at camp, the others were awake and the fire was rekindled. Pancakes were cooking in a pan and a little bit of civilization wasn't so bad after all. That day we went for a cross-country drive to a different part of the creek. When we could not get any further in the jeep, we started walking with no goal in mind. We were in a valley with chest-high grass. The meadow was seamed by gum trees and the creek was in the distance. Everyone walked at their own pace, left in their own world, with their own thoughts, quite some distance between us. It was the perfect silence between human beings, when no one feels the need to talk. But this silence was violently interrupted by the thundering sound of hoofs of all things. There was a herd of wild horses entering from the trees and claiming the meadow for their own. Up until then I had no idea there were wild horses in Australia. Kangaroos, yes, koalas, snakes and such like, but horses? They weren't disturbed by us and just minded their own business, playing around, eating, enjoying the warming sun. It was awe-inspiring to walk amongst them. I found out these horses are called Brumby. They are feral horses roaming wildly around Australia, basically descendants of escaped and lost horses belonging to the early European settlers, including the Capers from South Africa, Timor ponies from Indonesia, British pony and draft horse breeds, and a significant number of thoroughbreds and Arabians, true survivors, adapted to the harsh Australian life. We reached the creek behind the meadow, leaving the Brumbies behind. Walking upstream, we came to a secluded waterfall. The water fell into a deep, clear pool surrounded by high rocks, hidden from view. A place full of Aboriginal history, not visible to the eye but felt by the heart. For non-Indigenous people like me, a place or land means something entirely different than to an Aborigine. To us, land is a commodity. We buy and sell it, we own it. To an Indigenous person, it is much more than a place, and ownership is not even a concept. Rocks, trees, water, animals, humans, all were formed by the same substance. All were formed by the ancestor spirits who continue to live in the land, water, sky. The country is filled with relations, conversing in their own language and following the law of the land. It doesn't matter what shape those relations are. Rock, human, plant, they all follow the same law. The country is loved, needed, and cared for by Aboriginal people, and in return, the country loves, needs, and cares for its people. The country to an Aborigine is love, is culture, is identity, is self. There is a beauty and fulfillment in this that I envy to this day. That night, back at the camp, it rained and rained. So the 3 men and I found space in the 3-wall cabin to put our swags down and sleep. It was rather cold without a fire and the damp swags, so I snuggled up with Warrigal, the dingo. As mentioned before, I'm really not a dog lover at all, but they certainly have their uses. Plus, I didn't consider a dingo to be a dog, but something wild and mystical, far superior to a domestic dog. Truth be told, if the men hadn't been there, I would have been scared of the beast. With them, I trusted someone would save me should Warrigal start chewing on me. Soon everyone was asleep, but Otto and me. We talked late into the night, and some snippets of the conversation I remember clear as day. He said, "You've got to believe. You've got to invite the spirits. You've got to pray every day for them to make themselves real to you." That much was like any other religion, I thought. If you want it to be real, you've got to make it so. He continued, "The spirits would not bring you all this way and make things happen to you if you weren't able to understand them. They are talking to you. Hear them." All my life I had spirits talking to me one way or another. First they were friends, then ghosts, then I denied them, then they were gone. Was that what he meant? Otto said, "You came to Australia to understand the core of Aboriginality, and you met an Aboriginal person, me, who has been teaching for 20 years and who just finished writing a book about his culture. How high is the chance that 2 people like us come together? You were led to me. I wanted to believe, but 24 years of logical upbringing prevented full trust in something as ludicrous as this. Just as I could never fully immerse in church. Perhaps I was not meant for any higher belief, yet I yearned for it. There was this little ember in me, but I was afraid to stir it to become a fire, afraid to get burned or worse, burn up entirely. Warrigal woke me the next morning, and I used the first light to go gold panning at the creek. Armed with my pen and a sieve, I stood knee-deep in the wet, trying my luck. The hot sun hit me from above, and the cold water swirled around my legs. Pen after pen I shook and sieved. The technique has not changed for the last few hundred years, and so I stood there, like many crazy Europeans before me, looking utterly silly. But there were two things I wanted to try in Australia, digging for opals and panning for gold. So here I was, fulfilling my second wish. I doubted I would be much more successful with the gold than I was with the opals. I lacked the determination to keep on going. After a few days of hard labor and no result other than burnt shoulders from the sun and the sniffles from my permanently cold feet, I gave up. Andrew had to leave and go back to Byron for work, so we all departed with him and left the heavenly plateau and MacLeod Creek behind us.